This is episode number 4 with Dr. Mike Roussell.
So I think it's very easy to sit down and write a diet plan. But the biggest area where people struggle is then the application of that in their real life. You know, it's not a berry and it's not a shake or a supplement. There's not those things. The thing is consistency. That's really the thing that's missing.
What's up? Welcome back to another episode of Anchors of Health. I'm your host, Bill Choi of anchorsofhealth.com, and today's episode is under the anchor of nutrition. And I'm just so excited for you guys to listen to this because everything we talk about is super relevant. I really wanted to get into questions that get at the heart of what you all are struggling with. There's no fluff. Everything is really practical. You can listen to this episode 30 years from now and it will still be relevant. We talk about Dr. Mike's 6 pillars of nutrition, the fundamental principles of nutrition that are repeatedly shown in the research, total calories versus types of calories, the biggest issues that people are facing when it comes to nutrition and what to do about it, the common thing that all his successful clients do, a general framework of how to customize nutrition for yourself, the psychological aspects around eating and habit change, and so much more. You're going to love this one. So without further ado, here's Dr. Mike. What's up, everybody? I'm so excited to welcome a very special guest on the show today. When it comes to nutrition, he has literally done it all. He has a degree in biochemistry, a PhD in nutrition. He's an author, a speaker, a researcher, an adjunct professor at Penn State. He serves on the advisory board of Men's Health, Shape Magazine, and Livestrong.com. He also has a broad range of experience from consulting with food companies, medical schools, top-rated fitness facilities, to working with professional athletes and executives. And that was just a short version. Dr. Mike, welcome to the show.
Thanks. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. It's an honor to have someone like you on this show with such a wide range of experience. And the thing I love about the work that you do is that you do a brilliant job of bridging the gap between scientific evidence and the practical application of it in the real world. So let's start with the general question that I think is very important. What is your overall philosophy on nutrition?
So I think if we were to go like kind of the broadest view possible, in my overall philosophy on nutrition is consistency wins, and there are general principles that everyone should follow, and then specific principles that I think you need to adopt as part of your life and own personal biochemistry. So kind of a different way of saying that is there are lots of ways to eat healthy, and I think that there's a core group of habits and things that go into a healthy diet. But at the same time, I think it's important for the individual to embrace those, but then also seek what are kind of the specific adjustments within that fit their bodies and their lifestyles so they can achieve really ultimate ongoing health.
That's excellent. And can we kind of get into some of those principles? Because I know you wrote a book way back in the day called 6 Pillars of Nutrition. Do a lot of those concepts and pillars still stand today?
Yeah, I think what's amazing is, I would say they all do, all the 6 pillars, except one. I think one of them was, it was a meal frequency pillar. It was kind of about eating multiple times throughout the day. And at the time when I wrote that, it was more of a 4 to 6 times a day. And I think what research has shown since then, and what I've found the best work with clients, is more about 3 to 4. So kind of looking at 3 main meals and a snack. And on days that you exercise, that snack would be like a post-workout shake. But other than that, the other pillars, eat fruits and vegetables at every meal, eat protein at every meal, try to eat minimally processed foods, don't drink your calories, cut out foods with added sugars, and, be strategic with your carbohydrates. So basically, the carbohydrates is probably one of the more confusing topics of nutrition. And I think the simplest way to look at it is, you want to put your carbohydrates, you want to eat more carbohydrate-based foods closer to exercise. And the more exercise and active you are, the more carbohydrates you can eat. So you basically kind of titrate or adjust how many carbohydrates you're eating based on your overall activity level and then the time of day in which you're active.
And you know this, we've all seen diet fads come and go, right? Everyone's claiming that they have the best diet. There's conflicting information. There's a nutrition news popping up every day. So people are feeling overwhelmed and confused. So you kind of mentioned some of those. Are there any other core unflappable principles of nutrition and fat loss that are repeatedly shown in the research?
I think that it needs to be a marriage, that your diet needs to be some sort of marriage between optimal macronutrients. So macronutrients being proteins, carbohydrates, and fats, right? That there are different, how you eat different combinations of those in your diet impacts a variety of areas of your health. So that's important. And also calories are important. And the pendulum of nutrition has swung both ways to the extreme level, where people will talk about only thing that matters is the calories that you're eating. This would be kind of the classic Weight Watchers approach, right? And that pendulum has swung in the other direction, and especially more with kind of lower carb type views, that it doesn't matter about the total calories, it just matters on what you're eating and the types of calories. But both views, and my most recent book called The Meta-Shred Diet, it's a weight loss book, and I talk about this idea, like, both views are valid, but they're not necessarily exclusive of each other. The total amount of calories you're eating does matter, and the types of calories you're eating does matter. And I don't know why people feel the need to separate the two, because if you combine those two, optimize the right amount of calories for your body, and then the types of those calories, the results that you get are so much better.
Right, and that's a fantastic way of putting it, because I think, the general public likes this black and white, right? It's either one or the other. Yes. And you were saying that nutrition has become a lot. I think that's a great point, that nutrition has become news. Like, it never used to be news like nutrition. I remember, one of my first jobs as a kid, I worked as a line cook, and I had like a 20-minute lunch break, and I used to sit there at this diner and I'd read like USA Today. There was never anything about health and nutrition, like never. And if you would open a newspaper nowadays, there'd be all kinds of stuff. And so because nutrition has become news, there's a drive to, report new things. But, eating a protein-rich, fruit and vegetable heavy diet consistently is not like a new message over the last however long. And so it's like you just can't write the same thing every day. So, and creating those black and white statements makes for good writing. And I think also people want to think, like everyone struggles with their weight and with their health and what to eat. And so I think there's part of human nature that makes us think that the reason, I haven't been as successful as I want to be because there's something that I'm missing, there's human nature that's looking for that. What's the thing that I'm missing? And, it's not a berry, and it's not a shake or a supplement. There's not those things. The thing is consistency. That's really the thing that's missing. Right. Excellent point. Now, there's so many different areas we can talk about with nutrition, as you just mentioned. But I want to focus on the big rocks, the 90%, the things that are going to make the biggest difference, the biggest impact in the lives of people that are interested in two main goals, which is commonly losing fat and eating healthier. So you've worked with hundreds and thousands of clients. What are some of the biggest issues that people are facing when it comes to nutrition?
I think the biggest thing where people run into trouble the most is when they start trying to put nutrition into play in their lives, right? So I think it's very easy to sit down and write a diet plan, right? Or it's very easy to sit down and look at a magazine and see like recipes that you'd love to cook and all this stuff. And it kind of feels good. There's kind of this planning, this anticipation of all the good things that are about to happen that feels really good. But the biggest area where people struggle is then the application of that in their real life. Like no one plans for that moment where the meeting at work went 2 hours long, so they missed lunch, and they have 4 more things to do before they can leave the office. And what are they going to do? And they're hungry, right? Partly because they're stressed, and so the day has been heavy on them cognitively, which drains on your willpower. And so they're hungry and they're a little stressed. And so what do they do then? And what happens is they don't have a plan. And so they just act on that moment. And when you're in that moment, you are not in a good place to make a good decision that's going to be in line with your nutrition goals, right? Just like nobody is. It's just kind of the facts of how our bodies deal with stress and food. And so the biggest thing, and I've seen the biggest success with clients, is clients who take the time, or I do it for them, to plan so that they have backup options, right? There's like a famous saying that like, no plan survives the battlefield, right? And so when you hit that battlefield of life, you got to understand the perfect diet that you mapped out probably isn't going to work. And so what are you going to do instead? And so doing, preemptively coming up with those strategies, backup meal plans, I call them nutrition audibles, or things that you're going to do, things that you're going to have at your desk that you can eat. Those are really the game changers for people in looking to lose weight and eat healthier.
Right. No, that's such a fantastic point that you just made. And I kind of want to get into more of that a little bit later, but let's kind of back up a little bit and kind of focus on that plan. So everything starts with a plan. Where do people start in terms of creating that plan for themselves? Can you give our listeners maybe like a general framework that they can use to customize nutrition for themselves?
Yeah. So I think what you need to do before you get started, and, like when you, as a scientist, if you're going to run a study, right? And like when I ran my, the clinical trial when I was a graduate student, there's always there's a baseline or a run-in period, right? Where you put people on a diet and everybody's on the same diet. So you kind of get them at the same playing field, right? Everybody's on the same baseline. And then you can start making adjustments off that. And so I think the first thing that people need to do is they need to create that foundation. They need to create that solid baseline, because then if you start making changes to your diet, you need to know that those changes are having a benefit. So if you're all over the place with your nutrition and you're like, I'm just going to start adding 5, 6, 10 different things to your health and your exercise plan, you don't know what's going to work. And oftentimes what I find with people, and you talk about the big rocks, like creating the foundational plan is all about setting those big rocks in place. And with the majority of clients, once you get those big rocks in place, you actually don't need to get more complicated than that. Like being really good at the basics is all you need to get where you want to go for so many people. Like I know a guy who used to be in special forces, and he would always say, special forces guys, they don't do crazy stuff. They're really, they do crazy stuff, but that's not why they're good. They're good because they really do the basics really, really well. Like their foundation is so solid that no matter what environment they're put in, they still are really good at those foundational principles. And so with nutrition, I think where you really need to start, it's kind of that framework where I was talking about 3 meals and a snack during the day. And then I always say you anchor your plate with protein. So protein is like a really powerful nutrient. And even though Americans are generally eating they're eating a fair amount of protein, the way that people eat protein throughout the day is skewed, the distribution. Like people generally eat very high protein dinners and lower protein lunches and even lower protein breakfasts. And what breakfast data really shows us is that protein at breakfast is probably the most important time of day to have protein. I have a colleague who's a protein researcher at Purdue, and her newer research makes her think that if you had adequate protein at breakfast, which is about 30, maybe 40 grams if you're a larger individual, but say 30 grams of protein at breakfast, that's the most important time of day for your protein intake. And then if you've got less at other meals, it's not as detrimental to your physiology because you got it in first thing in the morning at breakfast. And so one of the reasons that I say you want to anchor your plate with protein is because if you're going to make a meal and you start with, say, like a lean piece of beef or a piece of chicken, right, how you're going to build the nutrition around that meal looks different than if you started with a bowl of pasta, right? Like if I gave you a plate and it had a piece of top sirloin on it, and I gave you a bowl of pasta, and you were like, go ahead and build a meal with each of these, they would look really different. And so just over the years, I found that when you start with protein, you end up with a more nutritious, healthier meal. Yes, you can make a healthy meal with pasta, but I think it's just easier if you anchor your plate with protein, especially because protein needs to be a consistent piece at all the meals throughout the day. I think that's a really foundational principle. Protein, vegetables, and then you add, like I said before, more or less carbohydrates based on your activity level.
So once those foundational principles are set, the next stage is actually doing it, which involves behavior change. So when people are trying to change behavior or habits that they've had for so long, what seems to be the most effective strategies on either adding new habits or getting rid of old ones?
So I think part of the thing that people need to appreciate when they're going into this kind of habit change and how do you layer on these new habits is we underestimate how hard it is to do something new consistently, and we overestimate our ability to do it. So if you were to sit down and say, what am I, sit down with me and we would talk, like you would probably leave with 1, maybe 2 things to work on over the next week. And I've had a lot of clients like disappointed, like that's it, that's all we're doing. And it seems really easy, but then they come back 2 weeks later and they're like, man, that was a lot harder than I thought. And so it's key to start slow. I think it's really, we're in this environment of the rapid fat loss, rapid body change, 4-week, 6-week, 12-week boot camp programs, transformations. But to me, the most powerful transformations, like the best way to lose weight is that you never have to lose that weight again. because we are really good at losing weight. We're just not very good at keeping it off. And I've never met a client who hasn't lost weight before. And one of the things I always do is, it's a health history, but not in a traditional way that people would take a health history, but more of like a narrative about their health. And I always find out, how has their body weight changed over time? And I'll get kind of the story of my client's life with relationship to their nutrition and their weight. And what I found is I've never had a client who hasn't lost weight. Like, they've all lost weight, but they end up gaining the weight back, and then they lose some more. Maybe they gain too much. And so my goal is always to say, look, my goal is that you never have to lose this 10 pounds again, right? That's really the goal. It's not losing the 10 pounds, but it's how can I help you never have to lose that 10 pounds again. And that's a little perspective that I think most people don't have. And I think when you're going into optimizing your diet to lose weight or optimizing for your health, thinking about what are the things that I can do, or how can I go about doing it so that I never have to do this again? Because it gets really frustrating. Like, if you've lost 10 pounds 4 times and it's essentially the same 10 pounds, it's really discouraging. And so taking that, kind of discouragement and turning it into optimism by saying, look, you know how to do this, but let's just do it in a way that it's going to work forever. And one of the best ways from a habit perspective to do this is to modify things that you're doing already and make them a little bit better. So, everybody does things almost right. Or, maybe you're doing some things that are right. But how can you take something that you're doing, like, let's say you already eat breakfast, but maybe you're eating cereal for breakfast. So how can we change that? Can we use Greek yogurt instead of milk? Can we cut out some of the cereal and add berries? Like, you already have the thing there, kind of the anchor of that behavior, but let's just improve that behavior. And then all of a sudden it becomes a lot easier than if you were to do something totally different, right? And so that's really, that's kind of the first place where I like to start. And then the second thing that is important to realize with bad habits is you never really get rid of bad habits, right? Those neurons have been laid down in your brain. Like, those pathways are there. But the best thing we can do is we can just kind of weaken those signals and create stronger signals to do something else. Like, I had someone ask me last week about sugar cravings. Like, they found out that I worked in nutrition. They're like, oh, doc, you help me with my sugar cravings. Like, how can I get rid of sugar cravings? And so I was like, well, look, here's the thing you don't want to know about sugar cravings. You can't get rid of them. It's always there. Like, you're always going to have an affinity for sugar, but you can change, how you act around it, and you can change that kind of craving for it. I will say anecdotally, I find that when I move clients from their traditional kind of higher carbohydrate, higher sugar diet, like, as they move to a more of a carbohydrate restricted diet that has less sugar in it, there is a reduced affinity for that cravings. Like, there is a behavioral, psychological change. Like, yes, if someone puts a cupcake in front of you, you're not going to be like, oh, cupcakes, I hate them. You're still going to want it, but you do have a reduced affinity for it. And I think people can get discouraged when they think it's going to go away. Man, I've been doing this diet for like 4-8 weeks. I've been working really hard, but I'm still craving pizza. Like, you're just going to, I think having that logical understanding of, you're not going to get rid of these cravings, but you can lessen them and create, kind of layer on stronger neurological pathways for other behaviors, that's what you're working towards being the goal instead of eliminating it. And just kind of understanding the difference there, I think, is really liberating for people.
Yeah, that's a great way to look at it. And speaking of cravings, something else that people have difficulty handling or managing is hunger. So what are some strategies that people can use for managing their hunger?
I think the other, logic works a lot of the time. And kind of, preparing, like I was talking about, having what's your plan, and having a plan to realize that you're going to be hungry. And I think for a long time, and I caught myself doing this at one point where I was trying to do everything I could to help a client's like eradicate hunger. But I think if we're being real, like, you're never not going to be hungry, because hunger is created for a variety of reasons. And if you look at hunger research or research around appetite, people talk about there are 2 different kinds. They call it physiological hunger, and then like hedonic hunger or reward-driven eating. And so physiological hunger is the hunger that you feel when you're calorie restricted. So if your body doesn't have enough energy, or it can't access the stored energy that it has, because sometimes that's the problem, you're going to be hungry, and that's your body basically saying, look, I need more calories to carry on and do the things we need to do. The other kind of hunger this hedonic or reward-driven hunger, that's hunger because of other things, social cues, physiological changes. So stress is going to elicit hunger. The fact that it's noon, right? And noon is when you normally eat breakfast. That's going to, kind of that Pavlovian effect. That's going to impact hunger. Social settings, like people are going to eat more or less, based on who they're with, if they're trying to impress the person, like someone on a first date versus eating with their best friend. All things equal, they're going to eat differently and eat different amounts of calories. And so there are lots of different things that impact our hunger. And then just, like layer on top of that, like your body can't tell the difference. So when you're feeling hungry, you don't know, am I hungry because my body actually needs calories, or am I hungry because I'm staring at a piece of cheesecake and I'm stressed? Right? Your body actually doesn't know. And in that moment, it's really easy to say to yourself, oh man, well, I need some calories because I haven't eaten that much today and I've been really quote unquote good on my diet. So I'm just going to go for the cheesecake. And so, when dealing with hunger, it's important to be able to just step back in the moment and think two things. Like one, it's okay to be hungry. And two, am I letting hunger dictate my nutrition, or am I letting my plan dictate my nutrition? And I think it's really important to work your plan and not necessarily adjust your diet based on how you're feeling. There is kind of this movement in nutrition. People call it intuitive eating. And I'm not a huge fan of intuitive eating as like an overall principle. I think if you are full, you should listen to your body and stop, right? If you're satiated, there's a difference between satiated, full, and stuffed. Right? There's kind of it's like a sliding scale of how much you've eaten. And I think when you're satiated, when you feel like you had enough, that's a good time to stop. And so, that requires some listening to your body and may be considered intuitive eating. But this other idea of intuitive eating is that, you kind of eat when you feel like it, and you eat as much as you feel like, and you kind of pick foods that you like. If I ate intuitively, I would literally be 500 pounds. I think because of all the factors that impact hunger and the foods that we are predisposed to eating when we're hungry, eating intuitively sets you up for failure. And I have found much more success with clients where we're saying, like, look, this is the plan. This is what works for your body and what's good for your body. Let's work that plan kind of regardless of our emotional state. That's where I like to start. Not saying you need to be strict, because you had alluded to this before, kind of with this black and white nature. I'm a big fan of the gray zone, and I think if you're going to look long term with your nutrition, you need to think about things not being in black and white. But I also don't think that we need to be, changing and making nutrition decisions in the moment based on how we're feeling, unless that feeling is, I've had enough, I'm going to stop.
Right, and that Gray Zones article is fantastic. I read that myself. It was very short and sweet. So
yeah, short and sweet, totally.
Right to the point. So along those lines of trying to stay on track, here's something else that people go through, right? So like, let's say they created this plan, they're fully committed, things are going well, but then someone brings cake and cookies to the office. They get thrown off track, eat the cake, start feeling bad about it, beat themselves over it, and just completely give up on the process, right? So like, how do people find that balance between commitment to an eating plan and managing their response when things get a little off track?
Yep. So I think it's, it kind
right?
of...
Like all these things are kind of related, right?
Yeah, no, this is an excellent question. It feeds really right into the gray zone. And so I think that there are different strategies for people depending on where they are in their diets, right? So let's start with someone who's starting out, and you go and you have a cake or a cookie or something like that. There's this concept in psychology called counter-regulatory eating. And it's also kind of in a colloquial fashion, it's called the what the hell effect. And I think more people have succumbed to this than realize. And when they hear about it, they're like, oh yeah. So the what the hell effect is exactly what you talk about. So you're at a party and there are cookies, there are cake, and you have a piece of cake and you're like, oh man, then you start feeling bad about having a piece of cake. And so you're like, what the hell? I'm just going to have like 4 more cookies and 2 more pieces of cake, right? So this idea that I've blown it, thus I'm going to go just do whatever because it doesn't matter, And that concept is really bad. not trying to put like food in a good and bad thing, but that's not a good way to go about one, I think treating yourself, but also going about your diet, because it leads to a lot of starts and stops, and it'll just kind of put you in a bad place metabolically. Like, you're never going to make any progress. And so instead, I think when you're in that situation and you have some cookies or cake, I think you just think, hey, cake happens, right? Like, people have birthdays. If I'm going to live in this world for another 50, 60 years, like, I'm going to have to allow myself to, I'm going to have cake. And so I need to figure out what to do when I have cake, other than eating the rest of the cake. And so, there was a really interesting study that was done. I want to say it was the University of Chicago, but I could be incorrect. Basically, what they did was they looked at this effect and found a really simple solution to this effect. And so what they did was they had some college-age women come in and watch some commercials, and they gave them a plate of donuts. And they were like, have some donuts, watch the commercials. And so people ate the donuts, and then afterwards they were going to do a taste testing for candy. It was, and these psychology studies, they basically make stuff up. Like, you're going to come do a taste testing for candy, but they had, were more looking at how much candy people were going to eat. So they separated these donut eaters into two groups. First group, they just took them, walked them down the hallway, and asked them to, taste these candies, eat as much as they want, and then provide their feedback on them. The second group, a researcher came in and was like, hey, I saw you had a donut, and I just wanted you to know that, like, everybody had donuts when they came in here. It's not a big deal. It's just a donut. I don't want you to beat yourself up about it. We even told you, go ahead and have some donuts, right? And then they took them down and down the hallway and had them do the candy taste testing. And what they found was the people who got that message of compassion, right? That message of, we told you to do this. It's not a big deal. Other people did it too. Kind of these different kind of key points. They ate 2.5 times less candy during the taste testing than the people who didn't get the message of self-compassion. So, the moral, or what we can take out of that research study, is the big thing is how we talk to ourselves after we have some cake. Do we just say, hey, it was a piece of cake, I'm back on the wagon, that happens, right? And then we're moving on? Or are we more in that self-depreciating, you blew it, this is never going to work, just do whatever you want, it doesn't matter, kind of the what the hell effect. So I think working with people and having that understanding of cake happens, right? But I always say, like, you're one meal away from eating for the body that you want, right? And eating for the health that you want. And so if you do have a piece of cake, that's cool. Like, you just get back on and get back after it. It's just like in baseball. If you miss and you strike, you get one strike. Like, you don't just walk off the field and leave, right? You get in there for another pitch. So I think that's the first strategy, and that's the strategy that I work on with most people starting out. The idea being, don't change your subsequent calorie intake. Eat your next meal just like you were going to eat your next meal, right? Just keep moving on. So a more advanced strategy, which I'll use with people who are further along in their weight loss journey, maybe much closer to their weight loss goal, so they're lean and they're trying to get really lean, then what we'll do is we'll just adjust their calorie intake subsequent to that candies or cookies to account for the calories that they consumed. And I call this more of an advanced strategy because I only really do it with people who are totally dialed in and are in a way that, plus or minus 400-500 calories in one day could make a difference, in the progress, that they're making, and would make a difference in the progress they're making. So, oftentimes if that happens, like, you end up eating 400 or 500 calories in this snack, what you would do is, have a much smaller dinner, a dinner that's more of a snack size, or depending on the calories you eat, maybe you just don't even eat dinner, right? If it was like double the size of that meal. And I call that an advanced strategy because I think it takes some additional cognitive foresight to understand what you're doing, and that you're able to then eat a smaller dinner or skip dinner, right? Because that you're still covered for the day calorically, and this is further getting you to your goal, right? So there's none of that kind of beating yourself up. It's more like you're a man or a woman on a mission, and this is how you stay on the mission, if that makes sense.
That definitely makes sense. And those are fantastic points you brought up. And it just goes to show you that, like, everything we're talking about right now are like the psychological aspects of food, right? Like,
yes, yeah.
It just shows how important it is. And here's, Dr. Mike that's talking about like real life practical things that people are going through. So I love this. And speaking of that, here's another rule that I know you've been talking about for a long time that I want my listeners to know about, is this eat and eat again rule. Can you talk about what this is and why it's effective?
Yeah, so this is one of my favorite, and I think if there's one really kind of simple strategy that I'll talk about, and afterwards people are like, man, that worked really well. Like I'm amazed, this eat and eat again rule, I'm amazed at how many people over the years have come back to me afterwards and be like, you know what, that was the difference maker for me.
First of all, how long have you been using this eating rule? Because it was in your peak diet and training summit video.
I mean, a long time, almost 10 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Like it was something that I kind of like a friend of mine, I literally remember the day he was telling me about it. It was something he was playing around with some of his college athletes. And I literally remember I was walking on campus at Penn State and he was telling me about it. And I was like, man, that's really good. And I gave it kind of a clever name and kind of developed the idea a little bit, calling it the eat and eat again rule. But so basically what the eat and eat again rule is, it's a way to regulate portions and based on your appetite and body size and things like that. And how it goes is you can eat as much as you want at a given meal as long as you could eat that same amount 2 to 3 hours later. So, saying like you could have a slice of pizza, right? Because probably in 2 or 3 hours you could eat another slice of pizza, no big deal. But you can't eat a whole pizza because chances are in 2 hours you're not going to sit down and eat a whole pizza again. And so what the eat and eat again rule does is it makes you become a lot more conscious about how much food that you're eating and what your appetite really is, and what it kind of continues to be throughout the day. So it's a good way of regulating just the overall amount of food that you're eating in a simple fashion that's customized and personalized to you. So like for me, applying the eat and eat again rule to a meal versus my wife applying the eat and eat again rule to the same meal, they would be, different size meals, which is appropriate because we're very different sized people.
Love that rule. And that's something that people can implement right away. Now, I want to switch gears and ask you this. Is there anything you find to be true in the world of nutrition that can't be researched, isn't yet supported by research, or maybe even goes against research because the data is flimsy?
I mean, I think that there's more things in nutrition that people think are true that aren't actually true because the data is flimsy. I think
you could talk about that if you want. I mean,
yeah. And I think that there's, so I think that if you look at the idea, a couple things, I think we put a lot in nutrition, like things that people think are true and things that people aren't actually true. I think that we put too much weight in general on epidemiologic and population-based studies. And so a lot of that data, if you look at, and my PhD was in looking at the effects of lean beef in a heart healthy diet. And so I think a lot of the kind of common beliefs about red meat or lean beef that are based on large population-based studies, that they increase your risk for cancer or that they're, increase your risk for cardiovascular disease, I don't believe those to be true at all. And I think clinical data supports that fact. Even what I think is interesting, if you look at processed meats, or you think kind of if you're grilling something, kind of the charred, it doesn't actually need to be meat, but if there's oil on something and it chars, right, that causes this formation of these heterocyclic amines. And I had this great conversation, it was probably about 8 months ago. I was in Denver, Colorado with this gentleman who, that's all he does is he researches these pro-carcinogenic compounds. And he was like, what the thing is about these is we know these heterocyclic amines are pro-carcinogenic, right? But we really have no idea how that works in the body. So if you take a piece of meat and it's charred and these heterocyclic amines form, but if you then consume it, it's we don't really know if that would stimulate kind of a pro-cancer pathways, because the amount necessary, or are there things in your body that will counteract it, that will make it not necessary? And to me, that totally blew my mind, because I was thinking wow, the charred, kind of the charred fat or the formation of heterocyclic amines, which is commonly found in processed meats when you cook them. To me, I felt like that was a nutritional truth. And sit across this guy who was one of the smartest scientists I've ever met, and he was I don't really know. I think we should hedge our bets in that we minimize that because it's not good for you. But he goes, I don't think it's as clear cut as many people think. So I think that's something I think is interesting. And there's a lot of misnomers kind of about meat and health. But I think an area where we don't know a lot about, but I think there's something to it is the idea of body weight set points and how we lose and maintain weight and then continue to lose weight, and what we do after weight loss to maintain weight, like kind of the whole metabolic milieu around that, I think is really complicated. Like, I'm a big believer in body weight set points, and kind of what I was talking about, how I'll take a health history with clients. It's more of a narrative. Everyone always has 2, maybe 4 body weights that they've maintained throughout their life. And when you talk to people or you think back about your own life, like, they're just specific kind of benchmarks where your body has hung out for, years. And so I think there really is something to this idea of body weight set point, and that how you get to a new set point, is really important. And that it needs to be a combination of diet and exercise, that if you over restrict calories to reach a new body weight, that when you meet that new body weight, even if you maintain that weight for a long period of time, your body still feels restricted. And so I always recommend that with clients that you lose weight by eating as much as possible, right? So that means that you need to really level and add in exercise, especially weight training or kind of intense cardiovascular activity, to create that energy deficit to allow you to lose weight. And I know, and I would, when you say what goes counter to the research, I would, totally agree with people who show data that says exercise is not very good for weight loss. Like people who go on like aerobic, there are like all kinds of studies that show aerobic exercise over long periods of time essentially has no effect on weight loss. I don't discount that, but I do think there's something about modest calorie restriction and consistent multiple types of exercise, so cardiovascular activity and weight training together, that those allow you to creates a metabolic environment in which your body doesn't feel like it's calorie restricted versus if you were to just cut calories. And that when you get to your new body weight, it's easier to maintain that weight, and hormonally you're in a better position than if you just cut calories.
Huh. Very interesting.
Like there's a study. So like one interesting way to, here's one, like one example of kind of what I mean by this, that, there was a study done in Australia, and they wanted to look at kind of hunger hormones. So there's one hormone in your body called ghrelin. It's actually the only hunger hormone that you have. You have a lot of satiety hormones, so hormones that let you know that you're full, but only one hormone that stimulates hunger. It's called ghrelin. And when you cut calories, as you can imagine, that ghrelin would increase. So what they did with these individuals, they put them on kind of a very low calorie diet. So they restricted their calories and basically just give them shakes, kind of, they call it quote unquote like medical weight loss, which is code for, we're going to cut your calories so severely that it would be, irresponsible to not have a doctor making sure you don't become malnourished and die. So they put them on this, super restricted weight loss program. And then they had them maintain their weight after they lost, I want to say it was 10 or 15% of their body weight. They maintained their weight. It was an 18-month study. And what they found is, even after 6 months of weight maintenance at this new weight, their hormones, those hunger hormones, ghrelin, were just as high a year and a half later as they were the first day that they started cutting calories. So it was essentially, your body never gets used to being hungry if you do this kind of severe calorie restriction and then try to maintain that. Whereas if you there's other research that was actually done at Penn State that shows if you create an energy deficit with exercise, you don't get that increase in ghrelin. You don't get that increase in the hunger hormones. So that's just kind of like one example how there are different ways to create energy deficits, and they have different hormonal and metabolic repercussions. Protein is another thing that acts positively on ghrelin. So protein can decrease ghrelin, and that's one of the ways that protein increases satiety and helps fight hunger. So, as you can start seeing, you start layering in these things, kind of consistent protein intake, moderate calorie restriction, intense exercise that's not easy for your body to adapt to, like interval training or resistance training, that helps create this metabolic and hormonal environment where you can lose weight, but you have a hormonal profile in your system that's very different than if you were to just cut calories. And so that's kind of what I think is interesting, but research hasn't really totally caught up with or shown to be true.
Well, we will be on the lookout to see what research does have to say about that in the future. So we're almost out of time, but let me ask you one last question. So we've covered a lot today, and you've probably been asked every single question out there. You even have a column in Men's Health called, I think, Ask the Know-It-All, right?
Yes, yeah, Ask the Nutrition Know-It-All,
yeah.
Yes.
So what's the question that nobody's asking but should be asking?
The things that I'm talking about with my clients now that I've never talked about them before is deliberate stress reduction and exercise as a means of controlling chronic stress. So things like, I think, sleep deprivation, like inadequate sleep. I think people think sleep deprivation, they just think like pulling an all-nighter, but I'm thinking, I'm more talking like you just don't get enough sleep every night. And, that using slow, longer duration cardiovascular activity as a means of controlling chronic stress. So for a long time in health and fitness, especially weight loss, there was a huge pushback against cardio, like slow, long cardio, like you were like an idiot for doing that, right? That it was all like high intensity interval training. Mm-hmm. But what I think that we need to do is we need to kind of have an appreciation for different things serve different purposes. And like I always now get in one, usually two longer duration, slow cardio sessions, not to lose weight, but more as a function to strengthen my heart, to give my heart a greater ability to pump blood, to stimulate the rest and digest, like the parasympathetic nervous system, to fight, chronic stress hormones. So there's like another reason, like everything's not about weight loss. I think is one of the things that people need to realize. And there are other reasons to do stuff. And so I think adapting behaviors where you're getting adequate sleep and you are, doing things like longer, slow duration cardio to control stress, taking the time to, if you can meditate or find, I call it deliberate stress reduction, like whatever that thing could be with someone, that those sort of things have such powerful impacts on the rest of your physiology and your weight loss. But I think people generally just don't appreciate that because you think if you're going to lose weight, it's like, how can I go harder in the gym? But sometimes it's not about going harder in the gym. It's about, kind of enhancing the recovery and letting your body do what it needs to do.
Right. Awesome. Fantastic. And that's kind of what we're all about here, actually, at Anchors of Health. It's all about mindset, nutrition, movement, and recovery. So that's a great way to close it up. And just before we go, if people want to learn more about you, where can they find you?
MikeRoussell.com. So just MikeRoussell.com. That's the place to go. I have a lot, I'm kind of revamped the site. There's a lot of links to the different things I've been doing. Like I have a new functional coffee that can help support brain health and neuron growth called Neuro Coffee. You can learn about Neuro Coffee there. I mentioned my book, The MetaShred Diet. You can check that out at MikeRoussell.com. A lot of content, a lot of resources, and then I'll give you links to all kind of social media, Twitter and Instagram. It's all Mike Roussell as well. So, I'd love to connect there and chat with people.
Great stuff. Again, the website is MikeRoussell.com. The links to his blog and all his social media accounts are there, as he mentioned. His book, The MetaShred Diet, is out right now, so go get it. Everything he puts out is super high quality. Dr. Mike, it was a pleasure. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks so much.
There you have it. I hope you enjoyed this interview with Dr. Mike as much as I have. Like I said, zero fluff. We got right to the point on the big rocks that are going to make the biggest difference and impact. Let me know what you guys think. Do you like the questions I'm asking? I spend a tremendous amount of time researching my guests and coming up with the questions that are going to help you the most. So email me. I read every email. Go to the contact page at anchorsofhealth.com. My contact info is there. And as always, if you want the show notes and everything else we mentioned in this episode, go to anchorsofhealth.com/4. That's it for me. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll catch you on the next episode. Peace.